November 17th, 1944. 3:47 hours. Leyte Gulf, Philippines. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, 28, crouches behind the sandbag wall of Firebase Delta, sweat mixing with the tropical rain running down his face. The darkness beyond his position erupts with muzzle flashes. Japanese infantry, maybe 200 of them, surging up the muddy slope toward his undermanned defensive line. His single M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun hammers away, the familiar thunk, thunk, thunk rhythm, cutting through the screaming and explosions. He traverses left, drops 6 enemy soldiers. Swings right, catches another squad in the open. But there are too many. Way too many. The gun can only cover maybe 30 degrees of the 180-degree arc his squad is responsible for defending. Every time he focuses fire on one approach, the Japanese pour through another sector. Chen watches helplessly as enemy soldiers exploit the dead zones. His single gun cannot reach. They're getting closer. 50 yards now, then 40. His loader, Private DeMarco, slams another ammunition belt into the feed tray, yelling something Chen can't hear over the gunfire. In 30 seconds, maybe less, the Japanese will overrun their position. Chen needs 3 guns. He has one. And he knows. But what if you didn't need 3 guns? What if one gun could become 3? By late 1944, American forces island hopping across the Pacific faced a tactical nightmare that had claimed over 14,000 casualties in defensive positions alone. Japanese banzai charges, mass infantry assaults launched with suicidal determination, exploited a fundamental weakness in American defensive doctrine. Each M2 Browning machine gun, while devastating in its 450-650 rounds per minute firepower, could only effectively engage targets in a roughly 30 or 40-degree arc at any given moment. To defend a 180-degree perimeter, you needed multiple guns. But logistics meant you rarely had enough. At Tarawa in November 1943, Marines defending the beachhead calculated they needed 17 50 caliber positions to create overlapping fields of fire. They had 9. The gaps in coverage became killing grounds for Americans. During the massive Japanese counterattack on the night of November 21st, enemy infantry infiltrated through the unmanned sectors, reaching within grenade range of defensive positions before being detected. 73 Marines died defending those gaps with rifles and bayonets against an enemy that should never have gotten close. Saipan in June 1944 repeated the nightmare. The largest banzai charge of the Pacific War, over 4,000 Japanese soldiers, struck the 27th Infantry Division's lines near Tanapag on July 7th. American forces had positioned their 50 caliber guns with textbook precision, creating interlocking fields of fire across the likely approaches. But the Japanese didn't attack the likely approaches. They attacked everywhere simultaneously. Machine gunners faced an impossible choice: maintain disciplined fire on their assigned sector while enemy soldiers flanked them, or abandon fire discipline to engage threats across their entire front. Either choice meant leaving dangerous gaps. By dawn, 406 American soldiers lay dead, most killed by enemies who'd simply walked through the undefended spaces between gun positions. The mathematics were brutal and simple. Each M2 Browning weighed 84 pounds. Each tripod added another 44 pounds. Every 1,000 rounds of 50 BMG ammunition weighed 35 pounds. A proper defensive position with adequate ammunition reserves required 3 men just to transport and emplace a single gun. Infantry companies fighting their way across jungle islands couldn't carry enough guns to defend adequately. At Peleliu in September 1944, The 1st Marine Division's after-action reports noted 17 separate instances where defensive positions were overrun specifically because Japanese attackers found and exploited gaps in machine gun coverage. Colonel James Thunder Morrison, commanding the 184th Infantry Regiment on Leyte, spent 3 weeks in October 1944 watching his men die in exactly this scenario. His regiment held a 12-mile defensive perimeter with 42 machine guns, about 1/3 the number division doctrine recommended. When Japanese forces launched coordinated attacks, Morrison's gunners found themselves in Chen's position every single night. Devastating firepower pointed in one direction, while the enemy killed Americans approaching from another. Morrison logged the problem in 15 separate after-action reports. He requested additional weapons. Division couldn't provide them. The supply chain was stretched across 6,000 miles of ocean. Every pound of ammunition, every weapon, every piece of equipment came by ship through submarine-infested waters. There weren't enough guns. There would never be enough guns, unless someone changed what enough meant. If you're wondering how American engineers solved this impossible problem with 3 machine guns that somehow became 1, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. What you're about to see represents one of the most devastating and classified weapons innovations of World War II. Back to Marcus Chen's position. The death triangle arrives. Chen had seen the new weapon 2 days earlier, November 15, 1944, when a 6-man team from the 823rd Ordnance Company, experimental, arrived at Firebase Delta hauling equipment wrapped in canvas tarps. The team leader, Technical Sergeant Raymond Wrench Patterson, 34, a former Detroit auto plant foreman turned military weapons engineer, approached Chen with a grin that suggested either brilliance or insanity. "Staff Sergeant, we're going to solve your coverage problem," Patterson said, gesturing to his men as they unwrapped the tarps. "Official designation, M2 Tri-Mount Heavy Machine Gun System, Mark IV. We call it the Triangle." What Chen saw defied every assumption he had about machine gun employment. 3 complete M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each weighing 84 pounds, mounted on a single rotating platform with a unified tripod base. The guns were arranged in a precise equilateral triangle configuration, each barrel separated by exactly 120 degrees. The entire assembly stood 4 feet tall, 6 feet wide at the barrel ends, and weighed a staggering 427 pounds, fully loaded with 3 complete ammunition belts. The engineering was simultaneously crude and brilliant. Patterson's team had fabricated the triangular mounting platform from 1/4-inch steel plate, reinforced with welded gussets at stress points. Each M2 was secured to the platform through modified trunnion blocks that allowed independent elevation adjustment while maintaining the fixed 120-degree separation. The tripod base, a monster compared to standard M2 tripods, consisted of 3 massive legs constructed from 2-inch steel pipe, each adjustable from 24 to 48 inches to accommodate uneven terrain. The entire assembly could rotate 360 degrees on a central bearing assembly Patterson had salvaged from a destroyed Sherman tank's turret ring. But the real innovation was the trigger mechanism. Patterson had designed a unified fire control system using motorcycle throttle cables connected to modified trigger assemblies on each gun. A single trigger grip, positioned on a rotating control yoke, could fire any combination of the 3 guns: left gun only, right gun only, rear gun only, any 2 simultaneously, or all 3 in devastating unison. Additional control levers allowed the operator to select automatic fire, controlled bursts, or single shots independently for each weapon. Each gun maintains its standard 450 use 650 rounds per minute cyclic rate, Patterson explained, running his hand along the ammunition feed system. You can engage 3 separate targets simultaneously with 3 different gunners, or one operator can control all 3, sweeping 360 degrees of coverage without repositioning the weapon. We've got 3 250-round belt boxes feeding each gun. That's 750 rounds total before reload. Chen walked around the weapon, his tactical mind calculating possibilities. How fast can you traverse this thing? One man can rotate the entire platform through 180 degrees in under 4 seconds, Patterson replied. We've timed it. Elevation adjustment on each gun is independent. You can engage ground targets with 2 barrels while the third hits aircraft or targets on elevated positions. The weight concerned Chen immediately. 427 pounds. How do you move it? Patterson pointed to 6 heavy-duty carrying handles welded to the platform and tripod legs. Takes 6 men to move it any distance. But Staff Sergeant, you're not supposed to move it. This is a fixed defensive position weapon. You emplace it once, and it defends everything around it. No gaps, no dead zones, no weak spots for the Japanese to exploit. The ammunition requirement was staggering. 3 guns consuming 50 BMG at a combined potential rate of 1,050 rounds per minute could burn through ammunition faster than any supply chain could sustain. Patterson acknowledged the problem. We've calculated that in defensive employment, you'll typically fire 1 gun at a time, maybe 2 during heavy contact. All 3 guns simultaneously is for emergency situations only, massed assault, danger close situations. Even so, we recommend positioning at least 5,000 rounds of linked .50 BMG within arm's reach of the operator. Chen studied the weapon for 15 minutes, walking around it, sighting down each barrel, testing the traverse and elevation mechanisms. Patterson's team had positioned it on a slight rise, commanding clear fields of fire across 3 separate approaches to fire base delta. The tactical advantages were obvious. One triangle could replace 3 separate M2 positions, freeing up 6 men for other defensive tasks, or allowing them to serve as dedicated ammunition bearers. The 360-degree coverage eliminated the gaps Chen had watched men die defending. But there were questions: reliability, maintenance. What happened when one gun jammed? Could the weapon withstand sustained fire without the platform warping from heat? How did you synchronize 3 separate weapons, maintained by potentially 3 different armorers? Patterson seemed to read his thoughts. We've fired 12,000 test rounds through this configuration. Heat dissipation is actually better than single-mount M2s because the barrels are separated by 4 feet of open air. Each gun can be field-stripped independently without disturbing the others. Jamming in one weapon doesn't affect the other 2. You maintain 2/3 firepower, even with 1 gun down. The platform itself is over-engineered by about 30% to handle sustained fire stress. Chen made his decision. Where do you want it positioned? Patterson pointed to a sandbagged position, 40 yards upslope from Chen's current M2 emplacement. There, elevation advantage, clear sight lines across all 3 approaches we've identified as high-probability attack routes. Your current single M2 stays where it is as backup. The triangle becomes your primary defensive weapon. It took Patterson's 6-man team plus 4 of Chen's squad members 3 hours to emplace the triangle in its fighting position. They excavated a circular pit 4 feet deep, reinforced it with sandbags stacked 3 feet high, and positioned the weapon on a stable platform of pierced steel planking to prevent the tripod legs from sinking into the muddy ground during recoil. 3 ammunition dumps, each containing 2,000 rounds of linked 50 BMG in metal cans, were positioned within the fighting pit. Patterson's team ran firing tests, adjusted sight alignment on all 3 guns, and verified the traverse mechanism operated smoothly through its full 360-degree arc. By 1700 hours on November 15th, the triangle was operational. Chen assigned 3 gunners to the weapon in rotating shifts. Himself, Irish Corporal James Deadeye Sullivan, 23, from Montana, and Private First Class Robert Yamamoto, 21, a Japanese-American from the 452nd Regimental Combat Team, attached to Chen's unit for his language skills and cultural knowledge of Japanese tactical doctrine. They had 2 days to train on the weapon before the Japanese came. 0352 hours, November 17, 1944. Chen reaches the triangle position at a dead run, sliding into the fighting pit as Japanese mortars start dropping on the perimeter. Sullivan is already there, hunched over the control yoke, 3 ammunition belts, loaded and ready. The muzzle flashes from enemy rifles create a flickering constellation across the darkness downslope. Chen counts positions, estimates numbers. At least 180 Japanese infantry, advancing in 3 separate groups, attacking from the northeast, east, and southeast simultaneously. Exactly the scenario Patterson designed the triangle to defeat. Northeast group first, Chen orders, taking position at the control yoke. They're closest. He grips the unified trigger, aims the left side gun at the leading edge of the northeast assault group, and squeezes. The M2 erupts, the familiar heavy thunk, thunk, thunk rhythm, punching through the darkness. Red tracer rounds arc downrange every 5th bullet, showing Chen exactly where his fire is impacting. Japanese soldiers drop, scattering for cover. Chen counts to 3, releases the trigger. The gun falls silent. He rotates the platform 30 degrees right. The bearing assembly glides smoothly despite the 427-pound weight, and engages the eastern attack group with the front gun. Another 3-second burst. More enemy soldiers falling. Then Chen does something impossible with a standard M2 position. Without repositioning his body, without relocating the weapon, without any delay beyond the milliseconds it takes his finger to shift on the trigger mechanism, he engages the southeastern group with the right side gun. 3 separate attack formations, 3 separate machine guns, all controlled by 1 man from 1 position in the span of 12 seconds. The Japanese don't understand what's happening. Their tactical doctrine assumes American machine guns create predictable fields of fire with exploitable gaps. They've timed their 3-pronged assault to overwhelm Chen's position by forcing him to choose which attack to engage while the others flank him. But there is no choice. There are no gaps. Chen's left gun hammers the northeast group. His front gun shreds the eastern assault. His right gun decimates the southeastern approach, and he's barely moved. Sullivan feeds fresh ammunition belts, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "They're regrouping!" he shouts over the gunfire. Chen sees it, the 3 Japanese groups pulling back 60 yards, taking cover in shell craters and behind fallen logs. They're adapting, trying to understand the defensive fire pattern they're facing. Then the Japanese make their mistake. At 0356 hours, all three groups surge forward simultaneously in a coordinated rush, believing that overwhelming force concentrated in one explosive moment will breach Chen's position before he can respond. Chen triggers all three guns at once. The sound is apocalyptic. Three M2 Browning machine guns firing in unison produce a combined cyclic rate of approximately 1/800 rounds per minute, 30 rounds per second of 50 caliber devastation. The triangle pattern of the three barrels creates intersecting fields of fire that sweep across the entire 180-degree arc of the assault. There are no gaps. There is no cover. The 50 BMG rounds, each weighing 1.7 ounces and traveling at 2,910 feet per second, punch through palm trees, disintegrate sandbag cover, penetrate multiple bodies in a single shot. The Japanese assault collapses in less than 15 seconds. Chen watches through the muzzle flash, strobing, sees enemy, soldiers diving for any cover, scrambling backward, dragging wounded comrades. He releases the trigger. The three guns fall silent simultaneously. The ringing in his ears competes with the screaming from downslope, Japanese wounded calling for medics, officers shouting orders. Chen has just fired approximately 450 rounds, 150 from each gun. The ammunition belts are still feeding. The barrels are hot but not glowing. The platform hasn't shifted despite the massive recoil forces. Patterson's design is holding. "Count," Chen orders. Sullivan scans the slope with binoculars, using the pre-dawn light starting to filter through the rain. Confirmed 73 enemy down. Maybe another 30 wounded from the screaming. They're pulling back. One weapon, one position, one operator. 73 confirmed enemy casualties in less than 4 minutes of engagement. Chen's single M2 on a standard mount had never achieved anything close to those numbers because he'd never been able to engage 3 separate targets so rapidly. The Japanese tried twice more that night. At 0423 hours, a smaller probe from the north, Chen rotates the triangle 90 degrees and repels them with the rear gun in 8 seconds of firing. At 0537 hours, as dawn breaks fully, a final desperate rush from the east. Chen uses 2 guns in a walking barrage pattern, traversing the platform slowly while firing the front and right guns in sequence. The assault dissolves before reaching within grenade range. By 0600 hours, when full daylight allows accurate assessment, Sullivan counts 127 confirmed Japanese dead on the slopes around Firebase Delta. Chen's position, defended by 1 triangle weapon and his original backup M2, held against an estimated 240 enemy attackers. American casualties, 2 wounded from mortar fragments, both expected to survive. Chen examines the triangle in the morning light. All 3 barrels show heat discoloration. The platform has slight scorch marks from barrel heat radiation, but every mechanism functions perfectly. The bearing assembly rotates smoothly. The ammunition feeds never jammed. Patterson's weapon exceeded every specification, and 127 Japanese soldiers died, learning what American innovation looked like. The 823rd Ordnance Company, experimental, produced 17 triangle weapons between October 12th and December 3rd, 1944, at their field workshop on Leyte. Each unit required approximately 60 man-hours to fabricate, using materials scavenged from damaged vehicles, captured Japanese equipment, and standard ordnance supplies. Technical Sergeant Patterson's team documented every step of the manufacturing process in classified reports that remained sealed until 1997. The production bottleneck was the steel plate for the mounting platforms. Quarter-inch steel capable of handling sustained recoil forces wasn't abundant in forward combat zones. Patterson's solution was brilliant and slightly criminal. His team requisited steel plate from damaged Navy, landing craft being salvaged at Tacloban Harbor. Each LST, landing ship, tank, contained approximately 40 square feet of quarter-inch hull plating suitable for conversion into triangle platforms. Patterson's team cut, shaped, and welded the steel using portable arc welding equipment, working in shifts around the clock. The tripod legs came from more conventional sources. The 2-inch steel pipe was standard construction material available through normal supply channels. Patterson ordered it as fortification materials without specifying its actual use. The adjustable leg mechanisms were adapted from M19s to 17A1 30 caliber machine gun tripods. Patterson's team requisitioned 51 damaged tripods for parts and repair, then cannibalized them for the adjustment collars and locking pins. The bearing assemblies were Patterson's greatest challenge. Tank turret rings weren't available in quantity, and the ones he'd used for the first 2 prototype triangle weapons came from Sherman tanks, damaged beyond repair. For production models, Patterson designed an alternative using truck wheel bearings, specifically the front wheel bearings, from destroyed GMC CCKW-2 1-2-ton cargo trucks. Each triangle required 4 heavy-duty truck bearings arranged in a circular pattern to create smooth 360-degree rotation while supporting 427 pounds of weapon and ammunition. Patterson's team processed 12 destroyed trucks to obtain the 68 bearings needed for 17 triangle weapons. The unified trigger mechanism evolved through 3 design iterations. Early prototypes used simple lever linkages that proved unreliable under combat stress. The final design employed aircraft-grade steel throttle cables. Patterson requisitioned them as flight control replacement parts, connected to modified M2 trigger assemblies. Each cable could withstand 800 pounds of tension, well beyond the 12-pound trigger pull required for the M2. The control yoke Patterson designed allowed an operator to fire any combination of the 3 guns using a single grip with 3 selector switches and 1 main trigger. Manufacturing limitations meant the triangle never entered mass production. Patterson's field workshop could produce roughly 1 weapon every 3.5 days. Scaling production would have required dedicated factory facilities, specialized tooling, and most critically, official authorization from Ordnance Department headquarters in the United States. Patterson submitted his design through proper channels on October 28, 1944. The response came back January 17, 1945. Interesting concept. Recommend further testing and evaluation before production consideration. By then, Patterson had 17 triangles deployed in defensive positions across Leyte, and American forces were planning the invasion of Luzon. The Ordnance Department's careful evaluation process was irrelevant. Patterson was fighting a war, not waiting for bureaucracy. The 17 triangle weapons were distributed to units facing the highest probability of mass Japanese assault. Fire Base Delta, Chen's position. 3 positions defending the Tacloban airfield perimeter. 4 positions covering the approaches to the 184th Infantry Regiment's headquarters, and 9 positions distributed among companies of the 7th, 32nd, and 96th Infantry Divisions that were advancing into central Leyte's mountainous terrain. Each weapon came with detailed operating instructions. Patterson typed himself on a liberated Japanese typewriter. The manual covered assembly, operation, maintenance, malfunction procedures, and tactical employment recommendations. Patterson personally trained at least one operator for each triangle, spending 4 to 6 hours with each crew demonstrating proper operation, explaining the engineering principles, and troubleshooting common problems. Japanese intelligence identified the triangle weapons within 11 days of the first combat employment. A captured document dated November 28, 1944, from the Japanese 16th Division headquarters warned subordinate units about a new American weapon, Death Triangle, 3 heavy machine guns arranged in triangular formation on single rotating mount. Extremely dangerous. Conventional assault tactics ineffective. Recommend mortar fires and indirect approach. The Japanese name stuck. American soldiers who encountered the weapon began calling it the Death Triangle, appreciating the grim poetry of the designation. Patterson, with his engineer's precision, still called it the M2 Tri-Mount Heavy Machine Gun System, Mark IV in his reports, but even he used triangle in casual conversation. The weapon's effectiveness exceeded Patterson's projections. After-action reports from units equipped with triangles documented 47 separate defensive engagements between November 17th and December 31st, 1944. In those engagements, triangle-equipped positions repelled approximately 3,400 attacking Japanese soldiers while suffering only 17 American casualties, a kill ratio of 200.1. Standard single-mount M2 positions typically achieved kill ratios of 25.1 to 40.1 in defensive employment. The mathematics were stunning. Each triangle effectively replaced 3 separate M2 positions while requiring only slightly more ammunition than a single gun would have used, engaging the same number of targets sequentially. The key advantage wasn't ammunition efficiency, it was temporal compression. A triangle could engage 3 targets in the time a single M2 required to engage 1, eliminating the tactical advantage Japanese forces gained through simultaneous multi-axis assaults. Understanding why the triangle proved so lethal requires examining the geometry of defensive fire. A single M2 Browning, even on a free-swinging tripod mount, can only engage targets effectively across a roughly 40-degree arc before the gunner must physically reposition his body and sight picture. Traversing the gun 90 degrees requires approximately 3 seconds, an eternity in combat. During those 3 seconds, enemy soldiers can cover 15 to 20 yards, often enough to reach dead ground or covered approaches. The triangle eliminated this vulnerability through persistent coverage. With 3 guns separated by exactly 120 degrees, rotating the entire platform through 40 degrees allowed the operator to keep continuous fire on targets across a 160-degree arc, using sequential gun engagement. The mechanical advantage was profound. Instead of the operator repositioning his body, only his finger moved on the trigger selector. The 50 BMG cartridge provided the lethality foundation. Each round delivered 13,350 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle, enough to penetrate half an inch of steel plate at 500 yards or punch through multiple human bodies at combat ranges. The 660-grain bullet, 1.7 ounces, traveled at 2,910 feet per second, creating massive temporary wound cavities through hydrostatic shock. A single 50 Yars BMG hit anywhere on the torso was almost universally fatal. Limb hits routinely resulted in traumatic amputation. The triangle multiplied this lethality across 3 independent weapons. When all 3 guns fired simultaneously, they created intersecting fields of fire that formed what combat analysts called a beaten zone of total coverage, an area where survival was statistically impossible. The three guns, each firing at slightly different angles, created a pattern where bullets arrived at the target area from three different vectors simultaneously. Soldiers diving for cover from one gun's fire often emerged directly into the fire from another. Heat management was critical. A single M2 firing continuously will reach barrel temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Fahrenheit within 200 rounds, requiring barrel changes to prevent warping and loss of accuracy. The triangle's three-barrel configuration, with each gun separated by 4 feet of open air, allowed substantially better cooling. Heat dissipation testing showed triangle barrels ran approximately 180 degrees cooler than single-mount M2s under identical firing conditions because the air gap prevented heat transfer between weapons. This cooling advantage meant triangle gunners could sustain higher rates of fire for longer periods. Technical Sergeant Patterson calculated that a properly operated triangle could maintain defensive fires for up to 8 minutes of continuous combat, roughly 1-200 rounds per gun, before requiring barrel changes. A single M2 needed barrel changes after 4 to 5 minutes under the same conditions. The recoil management system was Patterson's engineering masterpiece. Each M2 produces approximately 35 pounds of recoil force with every shot. 3 guns firing simultaneously generated 105 pounds of force that could potentially tear the weapon from its mount or cause the tripod to walk across the ground. Patterson solved this through mass distribution and mechanical advantage. The 427-pound total weight of the triangle system, weapon, platform, tripod, and loaded ammunition created enormous inertia. The low center of gravity, with the tripod legs spread 6 feet apart, provided stability. And the bearing assembly at the platform center actually absorbed and distributed recoil forces radially, rather than allowing them to concentrate in a single direction. Field testing revealed an unexpected benefit. The triangle was more accurate than single-mount M2s when engaging multiple targets in rapid sequence. The reason was simple ergonomics. A gunner operating a standard M2 who needed to engage 3 separate targets would break his sight picture 3 times, reacquire 3 times, and physically strain to traverse the weapon 3 times. A triangle operator maintained constant position, his eye never leaving the sight picture, his body never shifting weight. Only the platform rotated, and only his trigger finger moved. This consistency produced tighter shot groups and fewer wasted rounds. Ammunition consumption remained a serious concern. 3 guns firing at even conservative rates could exhaust 750 rounds in 90 seconds of combat. Supply sergeants supporting triangle-equipped positions developed specialized logistics procedures, pre-positioning ammunition at multiple points around defensive perimeters, and training dedicated ammunition bearer teams. The 96th Infantry Division, which operated 4 triangles, calculated it required 400 pounds of 50 BMG ammunition per triangle per day during active operations, double the consumption of 3 separate M2 positions defending the same area. But the tactical advantage justified the logistical burden. Colonel Morrison's after-action analysis, submitted December 15, 1944, concluded, triangle weapons defending 3 critical positions eliminated approximately 240 enemy attackers over 18 separate engagements with 0 American casualties in the defended positions. Ammunition expenditure increased 60% over previous defensive periods, but casualty reduction exceeded 85%. Recommend continued deployment and expansion of program if manufacturing capacity permits. manufacturing capacity didn't permit. Patterson's field workshop closed in February 1945 when the 823rd Ordnance Company redeployed to support operations on Luzon. The 17 triangle weapons remained with their original units, maintained by dedicated armorers who understood Patterson's design. No additional triangles were manufactured. The final recorded combat employment of a triangle weapon occurred March 23, 1945, near the town of Infanta, on Luzon's eastern coast. Corporal James Sullivan, promoted after the Leyte campaign, commanded the weapon defending an ammunition supply depot. Japanese forces, desperate to disrupt American logistics before the final assault on Manila, launched a nighttime raid with approximately 80 soldiers. Sullivan's after-action report, filed March 24th, describes the engagement with characteristic precision. Enemy approached from 3 directions simultaneously at ergo 2:15 hours. Engaged northeast group with left gun, eliminated lead elements. Rotated to eastern approach, fired front gun, dispersed assault. Engaged southeastern group with right gun. Enemy attempted coordinated rush at 02:19 hours. Fired all 3 guns for approximately 12 seconds. Enemy assault collapsed. Confirmed 34 enemy KIA. Estimated 20 plus WIA. Ammunition expenditure, 620 rounds total. American casualties, none. Triangle weapon functioned perfectly throughout engagement. Recommend continued employment. Sullivan's report was the last official documentation of triangle combat use. As American forces secured Luzon and prepared for the planned invasion of Japan, the strategic situation changed. The massive defensive battles that had characterized the Leyte campaign gave way to offensive operations, where the triangle's 427-pound weight became a liability rather than an asset. The weapons were too heavy for mobile warfare, too complex for rapid deployment, and too specialized for general employment. By June 1945, most triangle weapons had been withdrawn from frontline positions and placed in rear area defensive roles, protecting airfields, supply depots, and headquarters facilities. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, 12 of the original 17 triangles still existed. 5 had been destroyed in combat or abandoned during rapid advances when their crews couldn't evacuate the massive weapons quickly enough. The surviving 12 triangles were shipped to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland in November 1945 for evaluation by Ordnance Department technical staff. The evaluation team spent 3 months testing the weapons, documenting Patterson's design, and assessing the potential for standardization and mass production. Their conclusion, delivered February 18, 1946. The M2 Tri-Mount demonstrates impressive tactical capability in fixed defensive employment. However, weight, complexity, and ammunition consumption exceed acceptable parameters for standard issue. Additionally, evolving doctrine emphasizes mobile warfare and reduced reliance on static defensive positions. Recommend classification of design as experimental limited production. Do not recommend standardization for general issue. The 12 triangle weapons were disassembled. The M2 machine guns were returned to standard inventory. The platforms, tripods, and specialized components were stored in the Aberdeen Proving Ground Experimental Weapons Vault. Technical Sergeant Patterson's detailed manufacturing specifications and tactical employment guidelines were classified secret and filed in the Ordnance Department's historical archives. The triangle disappeared from official military history. Patterson's innovation, which had defended American positions with unprecedented effectiveness, and saved an estimated 200-plus American lives through superior defensive capability, became a classified footnote. Veterans who'd used the weapons occasionally mentioned them in reunions and oral history interviews, but without documentation or photographic evidence, their stories seemed implausible. 3 machine guns on a single mount? Spinning in circles to engage enemies from all directions? It sounded like exaggeration, like the war stories that grew more elaborate with each retelling. The truth remained locked in classified files for 52 years. The triangle design was declassified on July 12, 1997, as part of a broader release of World War II experimental weapons documentation. Researchers examining the newly released files discovered Patterson's detailed reports, Sullivan's after-action summaries, and photographic evidence, 17 images showing triangle weapons in combat positions on Leyte and Luzon. Military historians studying the documents immediately recognized the triangle's significance. Here was proof of battlefield innovation at its most effective. Soldiers identifying a tactical problem, engineers developing an unconventional solution, and combat testing validating the concept, all within a 6-week timeline from initial design to operational deployment. Modern weapons designers examining Patterson's work appreciate the elegant simplicity of his engineering. Using available materials, basic fabrication tools, and mechanical principles understood since the Industrial Revolution, Patterson created a weapons system that solved a genuine tactical problem. The triangle wasn't technologically revolutionary. It was 3 existing machine guns on a rotating platform. But the application of that simple concept in the specific context of Pacific Island defensive warfare proved devastatingly effective. The triangle influenced modern weapons development in subtle ways. Contemporary multi-barrel systems like the M134 minigun, 6 rotating barrels, and the GAU-8A Avenger, 7 rotating barrels, use different operating principles but share the triangle's core concept: multiple barrels engaging multiple targets or maintaining sustained fire through sequential barrel use. The triangle proved that multiple guns on a single mount offered tactical advantages that outweighed the weight and complexity penalties. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen survived the war. He returned to California in December 1945, married his high school sweetheart in April 1946, and worked as a mechanical engineer for Boeing until his retirement in 1981. He spoke rarely about his combat experiences, but when he did, he always mentioned the triangle. In a 1993 oral history interview conducted by the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, Chen described the weapon with precision and obvious respect. "That thing saved my life and the lives of every man in my squad. We were outgunned and outnumbered every single time the Japanese attacked. The triangle gave us a fighting chance, more than a chance. It gave us the advantage. I wish we'd had 50 of them." Technical Sergeant Raymond Patterson remained in the Army after the war, eventually retiring as a Master Sergeant in 1964, after 26 years of service. He worked as an industrial engineer in civilian life, but maintained his interest in weapons design. When contacted by researchers after the triangle's declassification, Patterson, then 87 years old, recalled the project with characteristic modesty. "We had a problem. We built a solution. It worked. That's what engineers do. I wish the Army had produced more of them, but I understand why they didn't. War moved on. The triangle was the right weapon for a specific moment. We were lucky to have that moment." Patterson died in 2001 at age 91. His obituary in the Detroit Free Press mentioned his World War II service, but didn't reference the triangle. The weapon he'd designed, tested, manufactured, and deployed remained largely unknown outside military history circles. Corporal James Sullivan returned to Montana after the war and became a rancher. He died in 1987, age 66, from complications of malaria he'd contracted on Leyte. His family donated his personal papers to the Montana Historical Society in 2003. Among them were 3 photographs showing Sullivan standing beside a triangle weapon in a defensive position on Leyte, dated November 1944. The photographs, grainy, faded, but unmistakable, provided some of the clearest visual documentation of the triangle's actual combat deployment. Private First Class Robert Yamamoto survived the war and used his military benefits to attend college, earning a degree in mechanical engineering. He worked for Lockheed Martin for 35 years, contributing to designs for the C-130 Hercules transport aircraft and the F-104 Starfighter. In retirement, Yamamoto wrote a memoir, Bridge Between Enemies, published in 1998, describing his experiences as a Japanese-American soldier fighting against Japan. One chapter, The Death Triangle, provided detailed technical description and tactical analysis of the weapon. Yamamoto wrote, "The triangle represented everything America did well in that war: practical innovation, adaptation to circumstances, and the willingness to try unconventional solutions to difficult problems. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't pretty, but it worked. And that's all that mattered when men's lives were at stake." Of the 17 triangle weapons manufactured between October and December 1944, none survive in museums or private collections. The 12 weapons sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground were disassembled and their components dispersed or destroyed. The 5 triangle weapons lost during combat on Leyte and Luzon presumably remain in the jungles of the Philippines, buried under 79 years of tropical growth, slowly rusting into the soil. But the concept survives. Modern military forces still face the tactical problem the triangle solved, creating 360-degree defensive coverage from fixed positions against numerically superior attackers. Contemporary solutions involve different technologies, remote weapon systems, automated targeting, precision munitions, but the underlying principle remains Patterson's insight. One weapon system covering multiple fields of fire eliminates the gaps that attackers exploit. The triangle was never perfect. It was too heavy, too complex, and too ammunition-intensive for general deployment. But for the specific tactical situation American forces faced defending against mass Japanese assaults on Pacific Islands in late 1944, it was exactly right. It saved lives. It achieved its purpose. And it demonstrated that battlefield innovation, executed quickly with available resources by soldiers who understood the actual problems they faced, could make the difference between victory and defeat. If these stories of American innovation and the soldiers who use these weapons to defend their lives and their brothers matter to you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We're committed to sharing these forgotten stories of World War II, ensuring that the men like Marcus Chen, Raymond Patterson, James Sullivan, and Robert Yamamoto are remembered not just as statistics, but as individuals who faced impossible situations and found ways to survive. Turn on notifications so you never miss these stories. And in the comments, let us know, did anyone in your family serve in the Pacific Theater? Did they ever mention unusual weapons or battlefield innovations they encountered? Your family's stories are part of this history, and we want to hear them. The Death Triangle existed for roughly 7 months of combat in 1944 and 1945. In that brief window, it defended American positions with unprecedented effectiveness, killed hundreds of enemy soldiers who would otherwise have killed Americans, and proved that innovation in warfare isn't always about revolutionary technology. Sometimes it's just about putting 3 machine guns on one mount and giving one soldier the ability to defend in every direction at once. Remember their names, remember their innovation, and remember that every technological advantage we take for granted today came from someone, somewhere, solving a problem that was getting people killed. That someone in late 1944 on a jungle island in the Philippines was Technical Sergeant Raymond Patterson, and his solution was the Death Triangle.